Emma Johnson wiped sweat from her brow as she hoisted the last crate of heirloom tomatoes onto her pickup. 5 years of blood, sweat, and tears had transformed her grandfather's neglected property into Wildroot Farm, a place that was finally turning a modest profit. The renovated 1920s farmhouse gleamed white against the backdrop of rolling fields, and her restored barn, painted the exact shade of red her grandfather had maintained for decades, stood as the property's crown jewel. Emma's peaceful morning shattered when the sound of heavy machinery rumbled from beyond her eastern property line. The Willow Creek Estate's construction had accelerated, and today they were clearing trees that had once served as a natural boundary. As dust clouded the air, Emma spotted a pearl-white Range Rover pulling up her gravel driveway, an unwelcome harbinger of the suburbia creeping ever closer to her sanctuary. Emma's farm had been in her family for 3 generations. Her grandfather, Arthur Johnson, had worked this land until his arthritic hands could no longer grip a hoe. When he passed away, the property had fallen into disrepair while Emma finished agricultural college and worked on several organic farms across the country, gaining the expertise she'd need. At 32, she cashed in her modest savings, taken out a substantial loan, and moved back to resurrect her family legacy. The barn had been her first major restoration project. Local old-timers had advised tearing it down, but Emma had spent months reinforcing the structure, replacing rotted beams, and bringing it back to life. Inside, she created an efficient workspace with custom-built shelving for seed storage, a potting station for seedlings, and a small workshop where she repaired equipment. The upper loft stored hay for the 2 rescue horses she'd adopted last spring. This barn wasn't just a building, it was the heart of her operation and a symbol of her family's agricultural heritage. As the Range Rover door opened, Emma's border collie, Max, trotted to her side, his posture alert but not aggressive. Emma scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from his presence. "Let's see what suburbia wants with us today, boy," she murmured, watching the impeccably dressed woman navigate her gravel driveway in footwear clearly not designed for farm visits. Something about the woman's purposeful stride told Emma this wasn't a friendly neighbor introducing herself. This was someone with an agenda. "You really should consider paving this driveway," were the first words Karen Winters spoke as she stepped from her luxury SUV in 4-inch wedge heels, somehow navigating the gravel with practiced precision. Her lemon blonde hair was pulled into a tight ponytail that seemed to stretch her features into permanent alertness. On Karen Winters, Willow Creek Estate's HOA president, she extended a manicured hand while her eyes performed a critical inventory of Emma's property. Emma reluctantly shook Karen's hand, naming the diamond tennis bracelet and the wedding ring with a stone large enough to buy a new tractor. "Emma Johnson, this farm has been in my family since 1926. Karen nodded dismissively, her attention already elsewhere. "Charming. Do you smell that? Is that manure?" She wrinkled her nose delicately. "Organic compost. It's how food grows without chemicals," Emma replied, crossing her arms. Max circled them cautiously, keeping a watchful eye on the visitor. "Well, our residents have been complaining about the odor and the noise. Those roosters start at, 4 a.m.? "I don't have roosters, just laying hens. They're quiet until about 7. Karen pulled out her phone and snapped several photos without asking permission. "We're concerned about property values, you understand. The development across from us has homes starting at $750,000. Our investors expect Willow Creek to maintain certain standards." The conversation quickly devolved into thinly veiled complaints about agricultural odors and unsightly farm equipment. When Emma firmly explained that her farm predated their development by nearly a century and wasn't subject to HOA rules, Karen's professional smile never wavered, but her eyes narrowed to calculating slits. "You know," Karen said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone, "there are several members of the county zoning board living in our community. Close friends, actually. I've hosted dinner parties for the planning commission." She gestured toward the eastern boundary where construction continued. "That buffer zone between us, there's talk of rezoning it for commercial use. A convenience store would do well there, don't you think?" The implied threat wasn't subtle. Emma felt her jaw tighten but kept her voice even. "My property line is clearly marked and protected by agricultural preservation statutes. You might want to review those before your next zoning meeting." "We'll see about that," Karen murmured, tapping something into her phone before departing with a wave that managed to be both dismissive and threatening simultaneously. That evening, Emma received an email from the County Agricultural Compliance Office requesting an urgent review of her livestock management practices. After several phone calls, she discovered Karen had already filed 3 separate complaints about her farm, all on dubious grounds that would require expensive legal help to fight. One complaint specifically targeted her historic barn, claiming it was structurally unsound and a community hazard. Emma sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by regulatory paperwork she couldn't afford to ignore, and felt the first real threat to her farm since she'd taken it over. This wasn't just a nosy neighbor. This was someone with connections and resources who clearly saw Wildroot Farm as an obstacle to be removed. 3 weeks and 2 cease and desist letters later, Emma was knee-deep in legal research when the familiar sound of tires on gravel announced Karen's return. This time, instead of the stern HOA enforcer, Karen emerged from her Range Rover wearing a casual but expensive linen ensemble and bearing a gift basket wrapped in cellophane. "Emma, so lovely to see you again," Karen called out, her voice honey-sweet. The complete personality transformation set off immediate alarm bells in Emma's mind. "What can I do for you, Karen?" Emma asked warily, not inviting her visitor any closer to the house. Karen's smile never faltered. "I have the most wonderful epiphany," she announced, clasping her hands in apparent delight. "I realized we got off on entirely the wrong foot. After all, we're neighbors now, and I believe in building bridges, not walls." She thrust the gift basket forward. Inside were artisanal jams and locally made soaps, all bearing labels from Emma's direct competitors at the farmer's market. "The thing is," Karen continued, not waiting for Emma to speak, "our annual Willow Creek Estates Community Spirit BBQ has hit a snag. The country club we booked had a water main break, and we're just 3 weeks out with nowhere to host it." She paused for dramatic effect. Then it hit me. What better way to introduce our residents to the agricultural charm right next door than to host our gathering here? Emma blinked in disbelief. "You want to hold your HOA party here? After filing complaints against my farm?" "Water under the bridge," Karen waved dismissively. "I've already spoken to my contacts at the county, and they're willing to put those minor issues on hold while we work together on this community initiative." The implied threat was clear: cooperate or the complaints proceed. Karen launched into a description of what she painted as a modest gathering that would bridge the gap between farm and suburb, while offering Emma a chance to showcase her quaint rural lifestyle and potentially gain customers for her produce. "We're talking about a simple afternoon event. 40 or so neighbors, a few grills, some picnic tables. Nothing elaborate," Karen explained while deftly sidestepping a pile of chicken feed. "We handle everything: setup, cleanup, insurance. You wouldn't lift a finger." Before Emma could form a response, Karen was marching across the property with the confidence of someone who already owned it. She spoke rapidly into her Bluetooth headset about table placements and lighting concepts, completely ignoring Emma's protests about private property boundaries. "This spot here would be perfect for the live band," Karen declared, standing precisely where Emma had planned to plant her fall squash. "Live band? I thought this was a simple BBQ," Emma called out, jogging to catch up. "Although just a small 3-piece, acoustics mostly," Karen replied, already moving toward the barn. "Now this structure is absolutely charming, so Instagram-worthy. We could set up the VIP area in here." What Karen strategically failed to mention as she breezed through Emma's workspace: the event had ballooned from its original 40-person gathering to a 75-person extravaganza after she promised the HOA board a true country experience to justify doubling the event budget, money she'd already spent on non-refundable deposits with vendors owned by her close friends. She also conveniently omitted that the real reason their country club venue had canceled was Karen's reputation for leaving facilities damaged after previous events and refusing to pay for repairs, claiming they were pre-existing conditions. As Karen paused to take a selfie in front of the barn for planning purposes, Emma caught a glimpse of a text message on Karen's phone. It was from someone named Tyler at the county planning office. "HOA event at the Johnson Place would establish precedent for commercial use. Good strategy." Emma's immediate refusal triggered what could only be described as a systematic campaign of harassment. The next morning, a county inspector happened to be in the area and needed to check her well water quality, something that hadn't been an issue in decades. The day after, another official appeared to measure the setback distance of her chicken coop from the property line. "This is becoming ridiculous," Emma told her neighbor Walt, an elderly farmer who'd been friends with her grandfather. "It can't be a coincidence." Walt shook his head. "She's got half the county in her pocket. Her husband's law firm handles most of the commercial development contracts around here." Karen happened to drive by multiple times daily, each time with a new HOA member in tow to admire the perfect venue. Her Range Rover would slow to a crawl as she pointed out features of Emma's property as if conducting a tour. On Thursday, Emma found glossy flyers in her mailbox for farm liquidation specialists and residential developers seeking agricultural land. There was no return address, but the message was clear. The breaking point came when Emma received a certified letter from the County Agricultural Board requiring a complete inspection of her chicken operation before she could sell any more eggs, a process that would take weeks and halt a significant portion of her income. That evening, her phone rang. Karen's voice was sympathetic. "I heard about the egg inspection. Such a shame. My friend Diane on the Agricultural Board mentioned it might be expedited if there were community benefits associated with your farm. Our BBQ could be just the thing to demonstrate that. Emma felt the walls closing in. She called the only lawyer she could afford, her second cousin James, who primarily handled real estate closings. They're squeezing you. James confirmed after reviewing the notices. You've got legal standing to fight, but it could take months and thousands in legal fees. Sometimes it's cheaper to give an inch than lose a mile. Backed into a corner and facing mounting financial pressure, Emma reluctantly agreed to host the event, but insisted on explicit written conditions limiting guest count, protected areas, and a substantial security deposit. 2 days later, Karen arrived with a contract and a leather portfolio. Standard agreement, she said, sliding over a pen. Just formalities. Emma refused to sign on the spot. I'll need to review this carefully. Karen's smile tightened. The board meets tomorrow to finalize venue arrangements. I'd need this signed by morning to secure approval. The 12-page contract seemed thorough, establishing clear boundaries for the event space, limiting attendance to 50 guests, and requiring a $1,000 security deposit. Emma carefully read each page, marking questionable clauses for James to review. Most of it looked standard, James told her after a rushed phone consultation. Though there's some vague language about event modifications on page 9 that I'd normally tighten up. Given the time constraint, it's probably fine if they paid the security deposit. What neither Emma nor her cousin caught. Page 9, paragraph 4, clause B contained deliberately vague language about reasonable adjustments to accommodate guest comfort and safety, a loophole Karen had instructed her husband, a corporate attorney specializing in contract disputes, to craft specifically for later exploitation. Emma signed the contract with cautious relief, believing she had protected her property while buying peace with her troublesome neighbors. Karen wrote a check for the security deposit with a flourish. "You made the right decision," Karen said, her tone suggesting exactly the opposite. "This will be such a wonderful opportunity for you to integrate with the community." After Karen left, Emma deposited the security check immediately. It cleared, providing a small sense of security. What Emma didn't know was that Karen had already hired event planners and caterers for a gathering 3 times larger than the contract specified, telling them the rustic venue was completely secured and instructing them to bill any venue-requested changes at premium rates directly to Emma. 3 days before the scheduled BBQ, Emma drove to the next county over to deliver specialty heirloom tomatoes to a high-end restaurant, a 2-hour round trip that paid well enough to justify the time away from the farm. She left Max with Walt, who promised to keep an eye on things. "Don't worry about a thing," he had assured her. "Nobody's going to start setting up this early." Emma returned just after noon to find her gravel driveway lined with commercial vans bearing logos for elite catering, Meadowland event rentals, and sound and lighting specialists. Her heart sank as she pulled around to the barn where the double doors stood wide open, revealing a hive of activity inside. Her workspace had been completely transformed. Industrial cooking stations occupied the area where her seed trays had been meticulously organized by planting date. String lights zigzagged across century-old beams that had never been designed to bear such weight. A team of workers in matching black polo shirts carried her equipment outside, stacking it carelessly near the compost pile. In the center of it all stood Karen, clipboard in hand, directing operations like a battlefield general in pristine white capri pants and a blue silk blouse that probably cost more than Emma's monthly utility bills. "There you are," Karen trilled when she spotted Emma frozen in the doorway. "We're making a few necessary upgrades. That ancient refrigerator simply wouldn't do for our food safety standards." Emma's beloved vintage Frigidaire, a fully functional piece her grandfather had installed in the 1950s, now sat outside in the sun, unplugged, with condensation already forming on its surface. "You're not supposed to be setting up until Friday," Emma managed to say, her voice tight with shock. "And my barn wasn't part of the venue agreement." Karen's smile didn't waver as she guided Emma by the elbow to a quieter corner. "If you'll just reference page 9 of our agreement, you'll see we're well within our rights to make reasonable adjustments." And with the heat wave they're predicting, moving food prep indoors became a safety necessity. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Several county health officials will be attending. We certainly wouldn't want any concerns raised about your property, would we?" Emma broke away from Karen's grip and marched to where 2 workers were removing her grandmother's hand-quilted wall hanging, a piece that had hung in the barn for 40 years, depicting the farm through the seasons. "Stop. That doesn't move," she demanded, carefully taking the quilt from them. "It clashes with our rustic chic theme," Karen explained with an exaggerated sigh. "We're going with a more neutral palette. Don't worry, we'll store it. Somewhere." Emma hung the quilt back in its place, hands shaking with anger. "This has gone too far, Karen. You've breached the contract. The event is canceled." Karen's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "Actually, according to Section 12, cancellation at this stage would require you to reimburse all expenses incurred thus far." She gestured around the barn. Custom lighting, commercial kitchen equipment rental, staffing deposits. We're approaching $15,000 already. Emma felt sick. She couldn't possibly cover that amount. The farm barely broke even most months. Of course, Karen continued smoothly, we could overlook any contract disputes if the event proceeds as planned. My husband always says it's better to adapt than litigate. As Karen returned to directing her team, Emma noticed something that gave her pause. Electricians were installing multiple high-powered appliances, running extension cords across the barn's ancient wiring system in configurations that looked decidedly unsafe. One worker was drilling into a support beam to mount speakers, sending splinters of 100-year-old wood onto the floor. You can't drill into those beams, Emma protested. They're structural supports. Everything has been approved by our event safety team. Karen dismissed without looking up from her clipboard. Emma stepped outside to catch her breath and call her cousin for legal advice. As she waited for him to pick up, she spotted a county inspector's truck pulling in. Mark Davies, the same official who had been giving her trouble about the chicken coop. Karen was already hurrying to greet him, all smiles and handshakes. Looking back at her barn, her grandfather's legacy now filled with strangers rearranging her life. Emma realized she needed more than legal counsel. She needed a strategy. This wasn't just about a party anymore. It was about whether she would still have a functioning farm when Karen Winters was done with it. The morning of the BBQ, Emma woke at dawn to the sound of vehicles coming up her driveway. She barely slept, her dreams filled with images of her barn collapsing under the weight of Karen's improvements. Through her bedroom window, she watched as a parade of luxury SUVs and service vans arrived, escorting workers carrying everything from portable bar setups to massive speaker systems. By 10 a.m., her property was unrecognizable. White event tents dotted areas she had explicitly marked as off-limits. A portable dance floor covered a section of her herb garden. Catering staff in black uniforms hustled between the barn and a staging area where chafing dishes were being arranged on linen-covered tables. None of this resembled the simple BBQ Karen had initially described. You need to move that tent off my seedlings, Emma told a worker setting up near her vegetable garden. Talk to the event coordinator, he replied without looking up. We're just following the layout plan. Emma found Karen near the barn inspecting flower arrangements that feature expensive exotic blooms rather than the farm's own sunflowers and zinnias. This has gotten completely out of hand, Emma said. There are delivery trucks parking on my winter squash beds, and why is there a bartender setting up in my tool shed? Karen glanced at her designer watch. Guests arrive in less than 2 hours. This isn't the time for venue dramatics. She thrust a clipboard at Emma. Sign this waiver for the photographer. We're doing drone shots of the event. Drone shots? Absolutely not. And according to our contract, this was supposed to be limited to 50 people in the designated area by the barn. Karen's smile was tight. We had an unexpected surge in RSVPs. It's a testament to how excited everyone is about experiencing authentic farm life. By noon, the BBQ had erupted into controlled chaos. Not 75, but 157 guests swarmed the property, including the mayor, 3 county commissioners, and the head of the regional planning board, all of whom Karen had invited without notice. A local news crew arrived, supposedly to cover a community engagement story. Emma tried to monitor everything at once, feeling increasingly helpless as her farm was overrun. Children with sticky hands climbed on her tractor despite multiple no-climbing signs she hastily posted that morning. Max had to be locked in the house after a woman threatened to call animal control when the dog barked at her toddler who was pulling carrots from the garden. Your dog nearly attacked my little angel, the woman in designer sandals shrieked even though Max had been 10 feet away. Moments later, the same woman stepped in chicken droppings near the coop and created another scene. This is disgusting. My Louboutins are ruined. I'll be sending you the bill and my lawyer. In the barn-turned-kitchen, professional caterers prepared elaborate dishes, sous-vide steaks and truffle risotto rather than the promised burgers and hot dogs, using equipment that repeatedly tripped Emma's circuit breakers. The ancient electrical system wasn't designed for commercial appliances, and Emma watched in horror as the lights flickered ominously each time the power surged. Your electrical setup is completely inadequate, the head chef complained after the third outage. We need more power or we can't complete the meal service. Karen floated through it all in a cream linen dress that cost more than Emma's monthly mortgage, champagne flute in hand, shepherding influential guests on tours of areas explicitly marked off-limits. And this is where Emma keeps her heirloom seed collection, Karen announced, leading the mayor into Emma's private workshop where generations of carefully preserved seeds were stored, so quaint and old-fashioned. The final insult came when Emma discovered catering staff dumping used cooking oil and food waste at the edge of her organic vegetable field. Stop! That area is certified organic, she cried, running toward them. You can't dump cooking grease there. Before she could reach them, Karen intercepted her, gripping her arm with surprising strength. "Emma, darling, the mayor was just saying how impressed he is with your property." Karen's voice was honey-sweet, but her fingers dug painfully into Emma's arm. Such potential for expanded zoning opportunities. When Emma tried to pull away, Karen handed her a champagne flute and stage whispered, "Don't make a scene. The county inspector who's been giving you trouble about your chicken coop is right over there, and he's actually enjoying himself. Wouldn't want to change his mind about those compliance extensions, would we?" Emma retreated to her farmhouse, hands shaking with a mixture of rage and determination. This wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal. She'd spent the past 2 days preparing for this moment, suspecting Karen would violate every agreement they'd made. Now it was time to implement her plan. First, she texted her cousin Megan, a reporter for the local news who worked for a rival station to the one Karen had invited. "Operation Farm Rescue is a go. Bring your camera." Megan had been waiting for the signal, having already cleared an investigative piece with her editor about predatory development practices threatening local agriculture. Within 15 minutes, Megan arrived through the back entrance to the property, using the old service road that ran behind the chicken coop. Unlike the station Karen had invited for carefully staged shots, Megan came prepared to document violations. "I've been tracking Karen's development plays for months," Megan whispered as Emma led her through the crowded property. "She's done this to 3 other small properties in the county. The pattern is always the same: create regulatory problems, offer help with strings attached, then document commercial use to challenge agricultural zoning." Together, they systematically photographed and recorded every contract violation, attendance numbers, boundary encroachments, unauthorized use of buildings, and property damage. Most importantly, Megan captured footage of Karen's husband discussing future development potential with county officials while standing on Emma's property. Next, Emma retrieved the weather-sealed outdoor security cameras she had installed 2 days earlier, small, discreet units that Walt had helped her position in key locations. One captured Karen personally directing catering staff to dump waste near the organic fields while checking that no one was watching. Another recorded the electrician expressing concerns about fire hazards, only to be dismissed by Karen's event coordinator. "We got more than enough," Megan confirmed, reviewing the footage. "But what's your next move? They're still trashing your place."